Hi, welcome. I'm Katarina Flaxman, the Architectural League's program manager. Welcome to the final FF distance edition of the 2020-2021 season. Over the course of this extraordinary year, as many of our lives were constrained physically, but in many respects greatly expanded and connected digitally, FF Distance Edition reinvented the League's popular New York City studio-based First Friday receptions, tours, and project presentations with virtual visits to design offices across North America. These programs provided an opportunity to gain a first-hand sense of where and how firms are working, and when possible, for virtual tours to recent projects or work in progress. This year's series has focused on architectural practices that expand disciplinary boundaries by taking on multiple roles, including design advocacy, fabrication studies, research, and community engagement. You can find videos of the majority of the year's programs on the League's website, and the most recent studio visits will be posted soon. Today's program, featuring the work of Mexico City-based Rozana Montiel, Estudio de Arquitectura, will be introduced and moderated by Thomas de Monchaux. Trained as an architect and raised in a family of architects, Thomas teaches at Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, and is a design writer and critic. His writing can be found in a number of publications, including N+1, The New Yorker, Places Journal, where this year he is the inaugural critic in residence for architecture, and Hauser and Wirth's Ursula, where in 2019 he profiled Rozana's practice. Following the presentation and conversation with Thomas, the discussion will be open to all attendees, at which point we hope that you turn your cameras on. You can type your questions in the chat, or when possible, we invite you to ask them using your mics. You can use the raise hand tool and we will allow you to unmute. Finally, information will be posted in the chat section for those seeking AIA CUs. Thank you all for joining us. Thomas, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Katerina. Can you hear me okay? So Rozana, let's take it from here.
Ready.
I'm very grateful to the League, period, really. Like everything useful about architecture that I've learned since architecture school, I've learned from the Architectural League of New York, from the events, from the conversations, from the lectures. The League just does an indispensable service to our community, and Rosalie and Anne and Katerina and all the people who make it happen are such heroes to our community of architects. And I'm really grateful to be here with you, and I'm really grateful for all the work that you do. So thanks to Zoom, the Zoom of it all, I've been going to a lot of weird events in the architecture world of Australia because I'm a really bad sleeper. And so at about 2 a.m., I'll go to some lecture in Sydney. And one of the best practices that is almost universal now in Australian academia and public discourse is, of course, to acknowledge and name the indigenous landholders of the geography from which the event is happening. So in the case of the island of Mannahatta, that is the Lenape people. And in the usual, many of these people were displaced to Oklahoma. This history comes to mind in part because, dear audience, Rozana and I have been cheating on you. We've been talking already. We've been having a kind of conversation. Our conversation has been in part about poetry. And one of the poets that we've talked about is the current poet laureate of the United States, Joy Harjo, who was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a city much on our minds this week, and is a member of the Muskogee Nation, and is the first Indigenous American to hold that position of poet laureate, and a remarkable poet and teacher. And so as a kind of invocation to our conversation tonight, I'm going to very briefly read a passage of hers, which was actually from an interview she recently gave. She says, "Some dreams are, I ate too much pizza dreams. Others have a different cast to them, and these others we know instinctually to pay attention to. Now, what happens is we don't live in a society generally that supports dreams as knowledge. And it's that phrase, dreams as knowledge, that I would invite you to hold. And we're not living in a place like that. But think about it. About half our lives, we're out gathering information that we may not bring forth consciously. And for some of us, it's like a library that we go to when we need to know something. It works in that way. So this idea that dreaming is not an alternative to knowing. The dreaming is a way of knowing. And that the sleeping world and the waking world, the world of imagination and the world of action are not opposites, but that they rely on each other, is a theme that I think about a lot in relation to the work of Rozana Montiel, who I'm somewhat incompletely introducing as we speak, and her studio and practice in Mexico City, which is one that I admire so much for so many reasons. First, because it's an interdisciplinary project informed by art, critical theory, urbanism, and all of these amazing themes that Rozana is weaving together, not least in her work as one of the 2016 Emerging Voices for the League, which I should plug. And her fame in the United States very justifiably rests on some very socially conscious, hard-nosed, frontline works of architecture, playgrounds, community centers, social and cultural armatures and infrastructures in Mexico City. This is tough, realistic, catalytic architecture as service. And I think that the work of Rozana Montiel's studio is part of a generation of architects who understand that the built environment is not an end in itself. Architecture is not the moon. Architecture is the finger that points at the moon. It's the catalyst for something greater and more important than itself, which is everyday life. You know, I would group in our recent Pritzker winners, Lacaton and Vassal, perhaps, in that movement, if it is a movement, that architecture is in service of action. And that's what makes it interesting. And Rozana's work has that quality. It is realistic, it is catalytic, it is tough, it is on the front lines. And you'll see that when we see some of her work in a moment. But at the same time, and this is something I treasure in her practice, it is also an architecture of dreaming. It is also an architecture of the fantastical. It's an architecture that is poetic as well as prosaic, that is extraordinary as well as ordinary. It kind of breaks down this false division we have in the culture of our profession, that you can either be a doer or a dreamer, a maker or a visionary. And I think that Rozana's work bridges this false divide between methodical thinking and magical thinking. And this kind of room for possibility, this room for contingency, this room for the unexpected, this room for discovery, this room for a dream, right? Which is a thought you're not planning to have, but you have, right? It's a visitation, a dream, right? Angel comes to you and tells you something you didn't know, whether you want it or not. So we know this is a virtual visit. And I'll tell you two more things before I start by asking Rozana a question. The first is we decided to organize this virtual visit into 5 virtues and 5 visitations. And the virtues are 5 themes that kind of came up in the conversation that Rozana and I have already been having. I'm going to try to name them a little bit, and then Rozana is going to describe some work of her that resonates. So the theme is the virtue and the work is the visitation in this sense. And the overall name that we gave this happening that we're sharing tonight is happenstance. And this is a very old-fashioned word in English. It's a sort of fussy word. It's a word your grandparents use. And I love it. I think it's such an old word, it should become a new word. Happenstance is somewhere at the intersection of the planned and the unplanned, of the known and the unknown, of circumstance and chance. It's a happy accident, which I think Rozana will say more about. But an architecture of happenstance is an architecture that leaves room for its own transgression, leaves room for its own occupation, leaves room for discovery. So that's the word, the kind of word of surprise and contingency. Somewhere between on purpose and accident is happenstance. So that's going to be the first of our virtues. And the other 4 of the 5, just so you know them coming up, are serious play, number 2, prosaic infrastructure, poetic infrastructure, number 3, displacement, number 4, and collection, number 5. And if you look very carefully at Rozana's background, you will see one of her amazing collections, which is a deeply poetical landscape, I would argue, in the spirit of Borges, Calvino, Marquez, some of our heroes of storytelling. So somewhere between the planned and the unplanned, the seen and the unseen is architecture, between the nouns of life and the verbs of life. That's my take on happenstance. And the fact that Rozana's architecture is so extraordinarily practical and instrumental and an armature for daily life, and on the other hand is informed by the knowledge of dreaming, in the words of the poet Joy Harjo, is what I'm really excited to spend some time happening around tonight. Rozana, I hope I did that justice, and I'm going to ask you, having given my incomplete definition of happenstance between intention and accident, what is your definition of happenstance?
So, thank you, Thomas. And I'm gonna share my screen. One moment, let's see if this comes here. Okay, so first of all, thank you to the Architectural League of New York, to Anne Rieselbach, who invited me some months ago to start thinking about this visit tour lecture, to Rosalie, Katharina, and everyone at the Architectural League. So, and obviously to Thomas for accepting the challenge to do this lecture as a whole conversation where we gather together And I think the input of Thomas is going to be really significant. So as Thomas said before, we have been gathering for weeks now to think about this happening. And we were a little bored about the typical lectures, and we were saying, why don't we start the conversation since the beginning and start trying to name and have some themes to talk about. So you already gave a good definition, but now my definition of happenstance is that I found 3 meanings of the word, which belong intrinsically to the architectural work that we do at the studio and how I personally live my projects. So one is the understanding of happenstance, that means by chance. For me, it's the moment where unexpectedly or by coincidence, by good fortune, by accident in the good sense of it, by serendipity, is how we start many of our projects. The second, happen, relates with the idea of happening. And it is important because for me, architecture exists for something else to happen. It catalyzes different possibilities. It's multifunctional. It sets the space for the unexpected, as Thomas already said, and it means losing control. So however, there is also the idea that within a project, accidents happen all the time. They should be seen as happy accidents. So because they lead to something better. This is what I really believe, no? It's when apparently a tragic situation can become a comic one, or when worse can become better. And the idea of stance means taking a stance for or against something, having a position, believing in something. And being clear on our convictions, feelings, opinions, perspectives, points of view, and have its solid ground values, especially when decided to compromise to certain things and not to others. So these 3 words that add serendipity, happenings, and stand ground are present in what I do. So do you see the image, the first image, just to be sure? Okay. So to illustrate happenstance, I will start with a story. And this is called blank thinking sheets. So in March 2020, I was invited to do an exhibition of my work at the Museum of San Ildefonso, one of the most renowned museums in Mexico City. And I entitled the exhibition Blank Thinking Sheets. The idea was to fill the void, the exhibit space, with blank sheets, creating a different experience of the space itself. The idea was to substitute any of the blank sheets with drawings of some of the projects we've done at the office, with the collaboration of many other people, as Marie Combet, for example, with her beautiful drawings. So we had just finished putting all the pages up on the wall. We were about to start filling some of the blank sheets with the drawings when the pandemic started. And suddenly the doors of the museum, I will put this one before. So the doors of the museum shut down and the project was interrupted and left unconcluded. So after a year, I decided to go back and see what had happened in the hall. I was expecting to see all the paper sheets on the floor, all turned yellow, nothing as white as it was left, even everything torn. And to my surprise, when we opened the doors, the space was impeccable. It seemed to have been frozen for a year. It was more beautiful than before. The texture, the dust on the floor, what was there left, it looked like a theater set. So as I couldn't complete the exhibit, as it was conceived from the start, I decided to resignify the space with another idea. The space was calling me to act in a different way. So this unconcluded exhibition of filling the blank sheets with drawings of my projects could become a different project, to use this space as a set for different performatic acts. I wanted to reflect on what would mean to inhabit the void, what my perception and relation with the space was, and what it provoked. The empty space breathes. The relationship between the moving body and the space is crucial in architecture and something we architects should ponder on. So we started and rehearsals. This is the backstage that we will shoot in 2 weeks. So the pandemic has shown us that we're not in control of everything, and we need to learn to let things happen. This is what happenstance means. Shits happen. So I took the chance to do a different project in the same space when the conditions of the project had changed. We recently met with the whole crew of the museum, and the director of the museum got so excited about the thought of representing the idea of a year where the time stopped, that I have now been invited to open the doors of the museum in September with the exhibition of blank thinking sheets, now in a different hall, but screening this performance. So this is a way to resignify things. This is a new start. This is a new blank page. So it's a good reflection of what has happened to us. And so please, you will see it on the social media when we do these crazy things for a day called Performatic Acts, reflecting about the pandemic. So this second theme, we call it serious play. And because I think that I'm really serious with play, and Thomas has written a lot about this idea of serious plays, which I really would like to hear a little more about these serious plays, and then we can start talking again about the idea.
Yeah, thanks, Rozana. You know, I think we forget that we were all children. I think we imagine that children are somehow another type of person. We kind of cease to be them. And we're all just very old children in a way. And we assign play in a kind of saccharine way to children, in some ways to try to protect its innocence, but in other ways to diminish its influence. And a well-lived life includes play from beginning to end. And one of the reasons I love the word play is that the play in a system indicates the level of flexibility in a system, the level of unpredictability, the area where we're not entirely in control. That's another meaning of the word play. And what I love about the previous project that Rozana shared with us, and as I said to you, Rozana, when we were talking about it, it began as an invention and it ended up as a discovery, right? That it started with a lot of intention and it ended up with a lot of revelation. This kind of adaptive reuse in real time is what makes it so radical, and that you could not possibly have designed that dust, but you can relate to the dust, you can assimilate the dust, you can adapt with the dust. One of the risks of the trauma of a year of being locked up, just like your project of paper in the museum was locked up, is that we will seek the illusion of total control. We will seek systems without any play at all, because we'll want things to be predictable, because we are afraid of surprises, because we've been traumatized. And the other risk is that we will want everything to be comfortable, because we have been made uncomfortable. That we will seek the soothing, that we will seek the kind of continuous dopamine hit that Netflix provides and denies. We will want to live into that illusion of control and comfort, because these are some of the things we've had to live without in a way. And when I speak about serious play, what I love is the idea of a little bit of danger. And this is building on the adventure playground movement, with which I'm sure many in our audience are familiar. This extremely wise legacy of the same generation that gave us my favorite architecture, brutalism, of a built environment that doesn't pretend that the world is easier or cuter than it is. And in Denmark, in the United Kingdom, even here in New York City, the adventure playground movement resonating with the kind of new brutalism was a sort of movement that empowered and learned from how children were already playing with the material culture of their trauma, with shrapnel, with bomb sites after World War II. And this was serious play. And there was a wisdom in this play, and embracing a little bit of danger as a kind of vaccination, dare I say, against a lot of danger. Something that kind of teaches our systems how to be comfortable with uncertainty. Okay, Rozana, that's what I got. Let's look at the visitation. That's the virtue.
So I love this idea of invention becoming a discovery, you know? Yeah. And let's space for improvisation and for happenstance again.
Yes.
So for me, play, it's an imagination device to compose and decompose this space. It's fiction, but and activates creativity all the time with its own narratives. And I think that building our own narratives, it's really, really important. And it steps away from the everyday routine to involve diversity. And diversión, for example, this in Spanish, diversión in English means fun. And for me, diversión in Spanish is having different versions of reality. So I really love to live in these different dimensions or different versions of reality, trying to play with the prosaic and the poetic all the time, you know? So, and I think that also play is fundamental to create a society and culture to reduce violence. So many of the projects that we do at the office include play, and play not only for children, but playing for everyone. So one of the clear ways to show this is the project of Fresnillo Playground, which maybe some of you will know, but just to talk a little about this project is, so this Fresnillo Playground is done in a housing unit in Fresnillo, Zacatecas, in the center part of Mexico. And it's one of the most violent-ridden municipalities of the region due to organized crime, and not only from the region, but from Mexico. So it's a really, really dangerous place to be. And this space had a, here I continue with this had a paved sewage canal that divided the unit into two. And we started thinking, what could we do with this sewage canal? And why don't we set up a playground? It already has slopes. Children were sliding from rain gutters, and we saw that and we thought, for sure. And why don't we add a little of serious play? Because I think that because of regulations, you could not do this in the United States or in Europe. And this activated the sense of community and integrated the housing complex in a much better way. So the intervention not only repurposes gutters as slides, but it also gave the local youth a sense of purpose and a desire to act. And so thinking about playing is not only for children, it's also available for adults and to architects on how to use the landscape as the program and how to offer more than we were asked to do. And this is always something that we're always doing also in the projects. How can we give more of what they have asked for? If they ask for a roof, we give more. We will give a community center. So in Fresnillo, we created a playground and we played in different ways. We play with shadows and light. We play with the stairs and the steps. We play designing a color palette for the buildings. And this is how we gave a new sense of space by changing the color of the buildings. Just by this simple act, we really transformed this whole area into something that people felt more safer. And here's a video of how play activated space, reduced violence, and healed the community. Do you hear?
Rozana, I could just listen to that music for the rest of the hour, really.
Yeah.
Instead of us.
It really puts you in the mood, right?
It does. Let's look at this one.
Yes. So this is
Veracruz, right?
Yeah, this is in Veracruz. This is another project that's called Roof Court. And this also involves play. And here we designed a portico agora. In between the columns, we included a whole program that was there for play and for different activities. So playing as sports, as games, and also as learning. And so these children that were always randomly being out and not having a space to be, when we asked them, what do you like more about this that we designed, was now we have a place to be. So this idea of changing space into place is also really, really important. And how can we start with a space and then transform it into a place, and a place for many things to happen again? And another of these projects that includes this idea is common unity. And this project happened in San Pablo Jalpa, where around 7,000 inhabitants in an inner city housing complex in Mexico City live. All common areas have been gated by the neighbors, and we thought, who thought that they were protecting themselves from violence, but they were instead like being more insecure. And we were asked to rehabilitate some of the courtyards of this housing complex. And one of our strategies, our design strategies to reclaim privatized spaces for public use, has been to replace the vertical for the horizontal. The vertical, that it's railing, walls, gates, and closures, which separate and divide, with the horizontal elements that are roof, floors, shelters, all the idea of connection, that obviously connect, reunite, open spaces, bring closer the community, and encourage social interaction. So again, this is what you can do when you include play in the projects that you do. And to think about this, here's another story of happenstance. And I'm telling this story because this happened with all the guys from the Architectural League of New York. So they came to Mexico before the pandemic last year, and they wanted to visit the project. So I took them to Common Unity, and there were around 15 architects from the Architectural League of New York. And we went there all dressed in black, and I took them first to some of the patios that had not been rehabilitated to show them how they looked before. And suddenly, a gang of guys came out of nowhere, or well, came out from the gates, and they show up like in really aggressive mode to question us. Why are you here? What are you doing here? Get out! You're not invited. Give us your cameras. What are you? They were really high and drunk, obviously, and so I was just explaining how this looked before, and this is how the patios looked before. And we went there. I was really nervous. I was really, really nervous, and I wanted to be calm and say, okay, nothing is happening here. Let's get out. Let's move fast. So we really moved fast, and we went to the other spaces that we rehabilitated. And when we came in, for our surprise, there was a girls' party going to start. So there were balloons, there were tables, and it was really welcoming because they invited us to join the party. They offered us a drink. And it's as simple as this. How can in a hostile space you can be kicked out? And in a welcoming space, you can be invited to join a party. So I think that the story speaks for itself, and how very, very simple things can change completely the behavior and interaction of people. So for me, this is one of the most important learning
slide from the whole presentation, Rozana.
Excuse me?
This is my favorite slide from all of the images, from when I started thinking. I love it. And even people drawing, so future architects.
Exactly. So changing to this idea of, like the prosaic and the poetic, it's like we have been talking about what does infrastructure really means to us, no? Right, Thomas?
Yeah. What I would emphasize about the projects we just saw and how they are a kind of infrastructure for life. They're an armature for life. They're a catalyst for life. As I was saying, they are the architecture is the means, not architecture is the end. The nouns in service of the verbs. And one thing I would mention about what we saw is the theme that applies to, in a way, all 5 of our virtues this evening, which is a theme of scarcity and abundance. These neighborhoods in which Rozana's projects that we just saw have made such a big difference. They've done so much with so little, right? But the right little. They've choreographed a scarcity so that it can be experienced abundantly. Because what are we really looking at? We're looking at some steel space frames. We're looking at some breeze block construction. We're looking at a kind of matrix that is in a way very minimal, very restrained, that uses resources very carefully. But there are little that does a lot. And they are, on the one hand, incredibly prosaic. They're incredibly ordinary, everyday. They're humble in a certain way. They're humble enough to learn from what was already happening on those sites. You know, the kids were already sliding down that dry culvert, and Rozana just brought some poetry to the slide. So they changed a place by making it even more itself. And that is also a kind of economy of means, and a kind of a way of transforming scarcity into abundance, which I think brings some measure of equity to these neighborhoods and environments that are otherwise ones that are not abundantly resourced. So that is the everyday magic of this work. And these three projects that we just saw, I would argue, are infrastructure, right? Just not as we usually think about it. Infrastructure for a party, infrastructure for an event, infrastructure for a discovery. In architecture, we often use infrastructure to describe everything that isn't architecture, right? That architects don't get to design. It's a very loaded word right now in the United States in political discourse, because, you know, what is infrastructure? Is it roads and bridges, right? Or is it other ways that one is supported in the everyday and also brought into the extraordinary out of the ordinary? So this idea of poetic infrastructure, the armature that we need in order to dream, in order to think big and dream big and have that kind of audacity, and to bring the world as it might be into the world as it is. This is what we try to do always as architects, but how can our architecture empower everyone to do this? So for me, this is one of the meanings of poetic infrastructure. The super impractical practical. Rozana, let's take a look at some examples.
Sure. So thinking about this question of how can we think of prosaic infrastructure being poetic? This is the next story or project I will tell you. And I think it's a project that it has both, and I call it Metropolis. So reality and fiction have a place here, and the prosaic and the poetic also have a place here. So the subway, the most ordinary or common infrastructure we can think of, the everyday life of millions of people commuting, could be really, really boring. But what if we bring an element of utopia and we can create a new reality in the subway? So one day I received an invitation to publish an urban project on a magazine where we had to recycle something instead of building something from scratch. And the story begins on a weekend when I sent all the team around the city to take pictures of underused or abandoned buildings. And when we came back on Monday, everyone had taken their pictures, and we saw the pictures, and two people had photographed a similar building and in different places, so that looked very much alike. So we started doing more research about it. We were really curious about this idea, and we found out that there were 22 almost identical buildings on top of the 1, 2, and 3 subway lines. So this became an epiphany, a magical moment of inspiration and revelation, really, because we couldn't believe. I knew before that there were like 5 buildings. And if you ask almost every people in Mexico how many buildings identical from the 70s with this television window, you know there are, they could say 5, 6, but never 22 buildings. Mm-hmm. So we started researching about these buildings, and the project appeared. It was a network of networks. So imagine this idea of Metropolis is about transforming Mexico City's subway system into a multi-service network, understanding the different layers of the city, from the underground to the roof. And each station would have a different program where you could move from one place to the other without leaving the subway. So this would change the identity of the city as a whole. We approached the mayor, we approached the political, different institutions, and everyone was really, really excited and wanted to move forward. But for bureaucratic reasons, it stopped. And it was there in the drawers, but I always keep thinking about this idea of this project, which I think it's really, really interesting. And the idea of refurbished buildings that are already there, that can be social public buildings connected to the subway, like in any other country would have been already like really used, and we have them underused. So some years later, I was invited to participate in another exhibition that they call Utopia. And so I decided, they invited me to do an idea. So I decided to reuse this idea, to resignify this idea of the subway stations, but now thinking in a very poetic and imaginative way. So this unfolded two ideas, thinking about utopia as uchronia and toponymy. Okay. So what does uchronia means? Now, this refers to a hypothetical or fictional time of a constructed world or an alternate history. And toponymy studies the name of places, their origins, their meanings, based on etymological, historical, and geographical information. So the idea was to create in the inside of each building an architectural concept that would be related to the name of each station, creating an alternate history of the buildings. So for example, Juanacatlan means the place where butterflies are. Salto del Agua, which means water springs, but it's also jumping into the water. So we started creating these fictional drawings of each of the buildings, and that the name would be placed on the drawings, creating a different story of them. So we were creating and recreating an idea of how could we imagine these buildings of the subway station. So it was drawn with its own narrative and its own history. And here is where uchronia and toponymy gathers again. So here, Colegio Militar, for example, Pino Suarez. So in this idea, we displaced the meaning of each one of it and translated it to something else. And this led us to our next idea of displacement.
Yeah. So, you know, the subway is obviously where you go to be displaced. You with a kind of dream logic, if we imagine how someone would experience it who wasn't familiar with this technology, that you go into the ground and you are displaced and translated by this machine through the kind of dark unconscious of the city, and then you reemerge through a seemingly identical spatial system to a totally different point in the city. You know, what an everyday miracle the subway is in that sense. You know, the poetry of the everyday, I think, is something that, like, we really see in that subway project, Rozana, where you know, the ordinary and the extraordinary are brought together, and you know, the subway is kind of revealed to be the unconscious of the city and the place where the city dreams of what it could be. And alas, in New York, we mostly just have numbers for our subway names. So when you do this project for us here in New York, you're going to have to do some numerology or Kabbalah or something to tell us the hidden meaning of our spaces. But I also love the idea that this idea of repetition and variation, it occurs to me as we're thinking about it, that the sameness and difference, that it is the same building 22 times. And yet, simply because that same building has been displaced throughout the metropolis, it starts to acquire a new character. Just like a displaced person speaks in a new accent in a new land by choice or necessity. And you talked, Rozana, about making place out of space, right? And how little you actually need, but how you do need that little to do that. And that
Totally.
transformation. Right?
Yeah, because in space it's more abstract, but when you create a place, you start building relationships, and this is where we want, not people to meet.
Yes, yes, and we've talked about this space of the in-between in your work, this reciprocal space, this intersubjective space, this space between I and thou, that it doesn't really exist without that reciprocity. Even as we're kind of trying to hold a space, you and I together right now with our audience and with the lead, where we're making a place out of displacement. And you know, what I would mention about this virtue before we visit the projects of Rozana to speak to it is both that place is something that does have to be made, right, out of space, and also this idea of displacement as translation. Literally in geometry, to translate something is to move it along a line from one point to another, just like a subway car moves along a line from one station to another. It is translated from the place of butterflies to the place of ocean waves. It is an active translation between one imagination and another. Because Rozana dreams in another language, all of this discourse is an interpretation and a translation. But then again, so is all of language, right? And I think that Rozana's interest in language is connected very deeply to her interest in the power of place, and the kind of syntax of place and the grammar of place, and the way that again, the kind of verbs of a place arise from the structuring influence of that syntax, but are not controlled by it. So to displace is to translate. And part of our discourse here is between the global north and the global south, and between languages and cultures, and this displacement is part of it. And I know, Rozana, you have an interesting theory about borders and boundaries. And I wonder if I could invite you or gently remind you to speak to that. But let's look at the work.
So here, this idea of displacement, and with separating the word, so place can be at the center, and it's not about the act of denying it, but like on all the opposite. It's like making a space for place. And as you said before, for me, it means something that moves from one place to the other, as these pilgrims move along a route of 117 kilometers, but it's also removing layers to find the essence, removing barriers or changing barriers into boundaries. So if we want to remove the negative connotation of the word displacement and stay with the word place, here's a place for placemaking. And I will explain you some projects that really talk about changing barriers into boundaries or open horizons. And this project for an offices that were called KTVO, which means contraband. It's for, this office is for communication and publicity. They asked us, it's a building that it's all closed. No? You have to have air conditioning to be at that building. No windows are open. And here we decided to take out the walls, the outer walls of two of the 8th and 9th floor where the offices were going to be. So we really, in a prosaic way, we took out the walls. And we not only that, we removed, if we can see here, this is how it was before when we find it. It was all closed. It looked like a hospital with very low ceilings that we call plafones in Spanish. White lights, all identical. It smelled really, really bad because no air could breathe. Nothing could move out. And there were fake elements everywhere. They were horrible. They were really, really horrible.
These are the offices we don't want to go back to, Rozana.
Exactly. And so the client asked us, how can we have natural light and air? Because they were used to be in a house where they had a garden and they were moving to this building. They were really afraid. There were 200 people that work in the 2 floors. And so we took the idea with Claudia Rodriguez, which I collaborated with her, and I have collaborated in many projects with her, so an architect friend. And we said, okay, why don't we open it and really remove the walls? It was really difficult to do it at the beginning. It was not so easy to do it, but it was amazing that we really got to do it. So we opened not only this, but several patios. And this was an idea of just taking layers out. No? If you can see, like taking all the ceiling, taking all the fake elements to see what was underneath and to see if all the structural elements could really breathe. And we made these interior gardens, these open gardens where people can be there and can have real air, no? and refresh. So, and we designed this lattice, we put a lot of plants. And what was really beautiful is that we discovered, if you see the structure, it's a beautiful, beautiful structure. It's concrete, that it will be really difficult to do it if you wanted. And it was underneath the ceilings. So what we just did was just taking and removing layers and taking walls out to open spaces. So how can we can connect the idea of interior and exterior, the idea of open and close? And it was just a matter of making visible what was invisible. And this place emerged. So also talking about the idea of removing walls, this other project that that we called Stand Ground, where we also removed the wall, but in a poetical way, because this was the project that we did for the Venice Biennale in 2018 called Free Space. And what we did was the wall becomes the floor. We brought the outside to the inside, but it's just the projection in real time of what's happening outside. So again, we stand ground for things to happen in a different way with the minimum materials and just showing that maybe it was more interesting to be outside of the Arsenale than being inside. No? It was more fun being outside in Venice, having a spritz than being inside looking at too many architectonic projects. So it was just a space where almost we find content in context, just bringing the wall down and projecting what was outside.
And I would add, Rozana, I think these 2 projects are also, in a way, prosaic infrastructure and poetic infrastructure, because the first one, literally removes the wall. and makes the outside into the inside and the inside into the outside in a way that is almost brutal in its simplicity and elegant in its brutality. And here, figuratively, with every kind of trick and smoke and mirror and elegant deception and optical illusion through artifice and scenography. So therefore, very poetically, tears down the wall. And so together, we really see the literal and the figurative, the prosaic and the poetic. And that, you know, it's not really a contradiction between these two modalities of practice, that they actually reinforce each other.
Totally. And this is the idea of changing barriers into boundaries or in open horizons, right?
Hmm.
So this next idea is, we call it fly on the wall. And, you know, it's this fly that you cannot see on the wall, but it's buzzing all the time and making noise. And it really bothers you. So this is how we call the studio that we gave at Cornell University in 2018 with Derek Dellecamp, Sanna Frini, and Erin Pellegrino. And this studio was about studying the border between Mexico and the US. And we traveled with the students to Tijuana to look at the wall prototypes that Trump had made. And again, happenstance appeared. So this story is that by chance, things happened. We were there with all the students, many of them which have never been in Mexico. We were walking through the border when suddenly 5 guys were walking really close to us, fast paced, but very, very nervous. And I thought they were gonna rob us, literally. I was really scared again. And suddenly we saw these guys climbing up the wall and crossing from the Mexico side to the US side. And we were really shocked. We couldn't believe, you know, like we couldn't understand what was happening, but they were jumping inside of our faces, just looking at that. And we were like living that situation, right? We were running. What was going to happen next? And we were speaking, and suddenly these guys were running through the Trump walls, prototypes. And 5 minutes after, the patrol came and arrested them. So the students really lived the situation, and this made them understand what the border really is and how to experience these things in real time. Completely changes the perception of things. And I think also one of the things that I always try to do in the projects that at the office is like thinking that change begins with a shift of perception.
Mm.
And this spring semester that I also taught at Cornell University, we called our studio with Sanna Frini abundant scarcities. So scarcity is abundant and abundance is scarce. And the whole purpose was not to see the cities, not to see scarcity as a limitation, but rather as an abundance. And to understand scarcity as a source of inspiration, as a creative tool, again, a basis for removing layers and stripping complexity. No? So scarcity opens a world of possibilities and compels us to return to the essential and to find voluntary simplicities. So we gave the students a matrix, giving them a collection of scarcities, context, and habits. So it was an assembly of elements of different arrangements for different circumstances, so they can create on one part a critical position of what scarcity means, but also like creating and starting with a critical thinking, but then changing into acting again, acting and making prototypes one-to-one with this whole matrix given to the studios. So here again, we talk about the idea of abundance and scarcity, right?
Mm. I think that video itself is just such an amazing document, and you know, this kind of notational system, like the one we're seeing on this slide now, Rozana, you know, it's a type of map, right? It's a way of recording information about a field of occupation and a field of data, and somehow looking at this map and thinking about that video. And we haven't talked about this, so I'm about to surprise you. But it brings to mind for me some of the language that is recently in my memory from the architectural historian Mabel Wilson, who was speaking about some of her work on the recent reconstructions exhibit at MoMA, Architecture and Blackness in America. And there are two phrases that stay with me from her discourse. One is mythic capacity, and the other is counter cartography. And mythic capacity for me, and I don't presume to know entirely how that's situated in her discourse, but it says that our relationship to the spaces around us and our transformation of space into place begins with storytelling, with our capacity for myth, and our ability in a way to bring a new myth to an old space, and to find a kind of capaciousness through the power of myth, through cultivating new mythologies to add to and complement and heal older mythologies.
I love it.
Yeah, mythic capacity. And then counter cartography, just seeing those prototype barriers from the back.
Yeah.
From the side that we have not seen them in the United States. In los Estados Unidos, Estados Unidos, like we only see the one side. And those walls, those prototype walls are famous from the front and unknown from the back. And so, you know, just that little shift is an act of counter cartography, and looking at the wrong side of things and showing us how those are also, how the back is also the front and the front is also the back. And the last shall be first and the first shall be last, as it says in scripture.
And that's the shift of perception that I was talking about, you know?
Can you say more about that?
How can we turn, like, for example, but this is changing the subway, but we did a project and people turned their back to the volcano all the time. And we invited them to do a hike to the volcano. And for the first time, they saw, they didn't give the back to the volcano, but they saw the valley. They looked at the valley from another perspective, and they changed completely the idea of what they thought about their neighborhood. And this was the shift of perception. And this was, you know, like Miravalle, it was the neighborhood called. It literally means look at the valley. And yes, they were giving the back to it. So just being, well, you know, like having these metaphors and this change of perception is how we also do architecture.
Oh, yes. I remember you telling me about this project, and Miravalles in this neighborhood was a kind of informal urbanism that was very much at the edge of a metropolis, at the edge of a city, at a kind of marginal position, just even spatially and physically, as well as culturally and economically. And yet, they also, just because of the geography, had this incredibly powerful and in a way privileged perspective on this natural landscape of this volcano. And just like shifting the gaze a little bit, kind of re-situates where you are, changes everything. And even though the spatial condition isn't changed, the place condition has changed.
Even this image, no? This is a Piet Blom, beautiful image, and we hacked it. Sana Frini and I hacked it and changed it, and like really like making, like taking ownership of it, but changing it and just like doing another thing about it.
Yeah.
And to start with the idea of our last theme of collection.
Yes.
And so we, like, for me, it's very important to gather like this idea of objects, as you're saying on the back. You're saying it on the back and in the front. And so Mauricio, my husband, and myself were really like collectors of different elements and things and insects. And but I'm also like very interested in gathering people together, this assembling people. And if you can talk a little about this idea of collection and assembling.
Yeah, sure, Rozana. I've been staring at this collection over your shoulder for days now, and I think it's going to go into my dreams. And two thoughts about collection. Architects are collectors. We all are. Charles and Ray Eames are the ultimate collector architects, right? And they're contemporaries, but it's something that we do. It has DNA in our profession, like going back to the souvenirs of the Grand Tour, and we can interrogate it as a kind of extractive practice, I guess, and a problematic one, but we can also celebrate it as a sort of creative practice. And the creativity of the practice for me has two parts. The first is this idea of assembly. And I love this word in English because an assembly is a mechanism, a device, a machine, something that does something is an assembly. When you don't know what else to call a really complicated mechanism in an airplane or a microscope, you say, oh yes, that's the assembly. It's all the parts that have been choreographed and gathered together so that they perform in a certain way, which again, this gathering together of elements so that something can happen is a definition, I think, of your architectural project, Rozana. So all your buildings are, in a sense, collections. But what's being collected is not just spatial practices, but people. They are the armatures for the gathering together of people. And an assembly, of course, in English is also a meeting. You come to assembly, whether it's religious, secular, educational, or whatever. So I love that assembly has these two meanings, mechanism and gathering. And then counterintuitively, and I say this, I'm a kind of bad collector myself, but what I've learned is that one of the paradoxes of a good collection is that it is an abundance. I see more beetles than I've ever seen on your right-hand shelf there, or at least more interesting beetles. But it's a kind of an abundance that also makes you aware of scarcity. It's a line that it's like a dashed line that shows you where the gaps are, where the missing pieces are. It's like, oh, I have this spider and that spider, but I don't have the spider that's halfway between the two. And so a good collection is also kind of spacious in that way. It's also a kind of armature for the collection that could be. It's a sort of a cultivation in a way of emptiness, an awareness of the impossibility of collecting everything, and the need to collect only some things. And then maybe to bring it full circle, Rozana, the need to have a stance.
Exactly.
Right? This spider, not that spider, in a world of spiders, right? So in order to make things happen, you have to have a stance. You have to have a point of view. You have to have an agenda. You have to have a way of making decisions. Even if you're making it up as you go along, you still need to make it up as you go along. And so, what I love in any collection are the gaps of like, oh, if I had this, it would go here. but I've chosen not to have it, or I'm not able to have it for various reasons. And in a weird way, even the gaps between the prototype walls in that stupid diorama are as important. You know, the ground is as important as the figure. The void is as important as the solid. The in-between, which I know is a word that you use a lot in your work, the in-between is as important as that it is in between.
Totally.
Yeah.
So this next project that I will show you, it's called Pilares. And it also, this project relates with this idea because it's a project that collects and assembles people. And it's a name given by the government, which pilar in English means pillar, column, support. But it also, it's who holds up the community, the pillar of the community, as we were talking the other day. So this project is under construction. This project is the first time I show it. And this project, it reunites and collects many of the ideas that we have talked about. And this is the context where the Pilares that I'm building is in. It's so just to put you in context, Pilares are a series of new community centers commissioned by the Mexico City government. And it's named after its acronym, it's Points of Innovation, Freedom, Art, Education, and Knowledge. And the main purpose of this social urban project is to refurbish small and underused plots in strategic and vulnerable areas of the city and create hundreds of educational centers there. So we were invited to the studio, was invited to do one of them. And this is the context. Our Pilares is in Iztapalapa. It's the most densely populated municipality in Mexico City with more than 2 million people. So it lacks public space and green areas. So the plot that we were given, it was an underused basketball court in a corner. And again, we found this all gated. And the interesting thing about this corner and this plot was that it had already some trees at the entrance. So one of our main strategies was again to open it and provide the street with public space, benches for people to sit, and more vegetation, introduce more vegetation in order to invite people to gather there. So the main access is an arcade of these pillars welcoming people in. So again, we change barriers into open boundaries. And we use one material, this striated reddish concrete block that give the center an identity and generates a play of light and shadows because it has this striated things are really deep. So the design of the block can be a lattice when it is needed also, like just taking out some parts of the block. And it is an inclusive and multifunctional space. So the idea is to have a sequence of rooms that connect with each other when they open up, generating a series of patios with vegetation where you can also sit like these patios. Patios become a sort of agora, again, places to assembly, with a floor design pattern also. And here's a view from the cyber school, and where there are also rooms for body and movement classes, arts and crafts, cooking. There's an orchard area next together in the second floor, and a workout and playing area. So in these very small plots, they at least require to have something about sports. So they just said, okay, so if you just put one trail machine, you pass with the idea of sports. And we obviously gave them much more than they asked for, as we always try to do. So we provided the place with a whole sports area using the infrastructure as part of the training area. That can also be a play area. So it can be many functions can happen there. So this idea is, again, no, this project has all the ideas that we have been talking about. And I would like to show you a video of the work in progress of the construction site, just to have an idea of how it is going. No? So one interesting thing about this is that we have a market on Thursday, the day that I go to visit the construction site. And this is the market that it's really near the entrance of the Pilares. So people have been talking with me and asking all the market guys, what are you doing? What are you going to do? And I'm really, really happy that I'm going to take all these barriers and gates out. So all this space that you see, it's going to be open. So people are really, really happy to have this center, this community center for them. And so I think that we're trying this Pilares. I want it to become a recreational cultural oasis. So it's space distribution, it's diverse, and it produces a feel of amplitude, even having a very small plot. And it will produce an edifying and pleasant atmosphere, which will invigorate the neighborhood's social fabric. So this project, again, as I was telling you, all these barriers moving out, opening space, making people gather, playing with one material to experiment with textures, and creating a play space, creating a poetic infrastructure. And it's a place for allowing, again, happenstance. So I'm really happy that this market will have, like, you know, in the corner, a space to be, and the kids that don't have a place to play there, that are in the market with their moms, can move out and go into this recreational center and have a lot of things to do. So I think that getting to the conclusion, because it's almost getting late.
Yeah.
I think that this idea to gather together, you know, like this conversation has already opened new possibilities, new ways of building narratives and creating storytelling. And just remembering the theme of the Venice Biennale that it's happening right now, and how we will live together. How can we gather together to create a space where the unexpected can happen, where everyone can be happy and standing? To be happy is to stand for something also. So we go back to our main idea of happenstance.
Yes. To be happy is to have a stance. To have a stance is to be happy. But it's a tough kind of happiness. It's a little bit different from pleasure. It is more like joy and less like being entertained. Or amused, or bamboozled, or distracted, and I think that's important too. And then that brings us in a way back to serious play. It isn't to be a passive audience; it's to be an engaged actor. We are all crew on Spaceship Earth, as Buckminster Fuller says, and this is part of the gathering together. And, you know, I think this last project, Pilares, you know, it brings together so many of what the themes that we've been talking about. I'm really taken with the economy of means. You know, it is again, a very minimal, in a way, project, just enough. This kind of steel space frame, some partitions, some support structures, that it does so much with so little. And in that sense, it's a very serious, very tough, very instrumental architecture. It makes a place more itself, you know, by kind of supplementing the market that's there already, using vernacular materials and construction techniques that are there already. and just shifts that a little bit with a strong stance, Rozana, but not one that is scripting the activity, right? It's structuring the activity that's there. It's letting a lot of things happen, but it's not making any one thing happen. And I think this quality is the quality of happenstance that I see in Pilares, and how it answers that question: how do we live together? How do we come together? Especially after this year of necessary isolation and necessary being apart. And our group, you know, my fear, speaking for myself, of course, is that we play it safe, that we seek things to be entertaining and predictable.
And we need to include some danger, some risk in a good way. No?
Yes.
And this idea of open spaces that we need more and more, you know, to be there, but for many things to happen.
Yes.
So yeah, I love this project, and being on the construction site, you know, like seeing how it's going and talking to all the people in the market every day, like, you know, really being curious and eager to be there. So I think that it's almost 7:30.
Yeah. Yes, I just want to say, I see one question in our chat. If we open it up to our
I don't know, Katarina, how are we doing?
Our beloved audience. If Katarina will allow it, I'm going to read the question to you, Rozana.
I'm going to stop sharing.
Tenemos una pregunta de ¿qué quiere ser nuestros temas en español? Por ejemplo, happenstance es por casualidad. Y esto es una conversación en inglés. Pero estamos entre los estados, the boundary out of the barrier, right? Linking across that divide. So what becomes of these themes when we say them in Spanish? Can we translate them back?
So that's the question?
I think that's the question. So happenstance por casualidad. Nos gustamos. Serious play, diversiones seriosas, or ¿qué queremos decir?
Okay. What do we mean with this?
Or how would we say it in Spanish?
Oh, okay. So I think it's not so easy to translate many words, you know, like it's not a strict definition or a strict and clear translation of the words all the time. No, I think that's the amazing thing of working in different languages, right? It's the idea of trying to do many things in different, translating into many different ways. No?
Yeah, and no translation is ever perfect. And
exactly.
I forget which poet said that the truest version of any text is once it's been translated into another language. Then it becomes itself.
And I'm seeing here in Julia Gomez Candel. Hi, Julia. So yeah, just to say that these projects, and that many of these projects were done for Infonavit, like Common Unity, Court, and Fresnillo, and with Carlos Edillo, who was in charge of that, and Julia was a very important part of it and making things happen, you know, like, so thank you, Julia, for being here and hearing all this.
I would add, I think we can stretch about 10 minutes, right, Katarina? And if anyone would like to turn their camera or ask a question or type it in.
Yeah, it would be really nice if everyone could turn their cameras on. So
yeah, we want to see you.
Everyone.
Rozana
see Melly also, like, hi, Melly. Yeah.
Like
Yeah, it's interesting because you don't know where you're talking. Laura, hi Laura. Yeah. So thank you for being here and listening to this crazy idea of having a whole conversation and trying to understand many of the projects also through the vision of Thomas, which I think it's amazing.
Amazing for me too, Rozana.
Wow, my husband is here.
Hey, now it's a party.
So you can ask him about the collection of spiders, because many of these he has gathered them. So we're mixing all this collection of spiders.
So that let me ask you about the collection of spiders. How did that start?
Well, I think that even when we met, Mauricio and myself, like we were already gathering our own things, and suddenly I saw that he loved gathering these insects, and I was really a fan of gathering insects too. And now Hannah, our daughter, is also like she loves them. And when her friends come, they're really scared about it. They're asking all the time questions about how can this be here, So it's been just like that. So
yeah, but that's a good example of just a little bit of danger, like to be scared by a dead spider, right? It gives you a taste for danger that will help you when you are in danger, no? Like again, it's like a little vaccination or inoculation or experience
and also I would like to add, like, well, there are many things that you always want to add in these conversations, but like all these projects are done by many people, right? Like gathering again people, not only for the people who are gonna be using the projects that we're building, but also the people that we're helping and helping co-create these projects, all the people that are in the office, that which without them we couldn't be doing these projects, all the institutions that are gathered together, like Fonavit, and now many for the government, for Pilares, but also Pilares was Piensa Sostenible with Carlos Cedillo again, who invited a lot of architects to do these projects. And I think that these are all these persons that are there, that are, in between of where you want to stand to make these projects be done, really.
Yeah, and not to put words in your mouth, Rozana, you tell me if I'm wrong, but one of the things I admire in your work, and I think is worth saying here at the context of the League, where we're all architects, is that the makers of your architecture in a very particular way are its users, that they make something out of it. They are in a way the ultimate placemakers of the spaces that you are configuring, and they really seem like authors of their environments onto this kind of slightly minimalist but essential armature that you provided. And for me, this seems to be kind of the essence of this kind of catalytic architecture,
yeah, and seeing not only people as consumers of space, but as as placemakers, as you're saying. And I think this is really, really important.
Yes, and that's part of gathering together. That the architecture exists neither in the hands of the architect nor in the hands of the user, but in that in between reciprocity across time and space, right? Between the designer and the user. And the user is in that sense the author of the architecture, as much as the designer.
Totally. And so this is a pretext, Thomas, to continue and opening possibilities for this to create something else, right?
Yes.
From our conversation.
Yes. Our, your architecture is an architecture of openness, not of barriers, as you say, but of boundaries. And one sets a boundary with agency, but also it's open-ended and it's blurry, and it's open to possibility and open to discovery, like your first project. It told you what it was going to be. So hopefully not to the vexation of our beautiful audience in the League, we are making this an inconclusive and open-ended conversation. It's 7:36, and I think we're officially sanctioned until 7:40. So if there is anyone who would like to speak up, or
yeah, no, not only you don't have to ask a question, but you can speak up. Not just
like to join our happening.
So Meli, yes, please do.
Hi, Rozana. Hi, Thomas. It was absolutely incredible to hear you both speaking. My English is a little rusty, so excuse me for my pronunciation and my grammar, but I have a question.
Es horrible, no importa.
But very understandable. So I have a question that I've been trying to formulate throughout the conversation, and I'm gonna try to say it as clear as I can, but seizing the opportunity that Rozana said that we can just give a commentary if my question isn't clear, I'm saved. So when I'm Mexican, by the way, I live in Guadalajara, but I have lived for a long time in Mexico City. And when we talk about public space in conferences and so on, we often speak about safety, security, gender. We always think about about violence when it comes to designing available public spaces between a lot of other things. So when Rozana, you showed us the beautiful place and the beautiful work you did in la unidad habitacional, the habitational unity, I don't know how to say in English. You showed us I'm sorry, Thomas. You showed us the contrast between the place that you haven't worked on and the place that you have intervened. And my question is, thinking about what Thomas said about the border, when the front is also the back and the back is also the front, when we think about the people that inhabit these places, and we think about the people who is violent and the people who is being violented, I don't know how to say it. El violento y el que está siendo violentado. I have a very clear idea of how your work applies to the people that it's being violated, but how do you think your work applies to the violent one? How do you think about the front and the back of this situation? I know there has to be an answer, but I want to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, well, it's not always black and white, right? And it's not always not so easy to know how to do it. But like this experience that Katarina and Rosalie and Liv, like I'm not telling it, you can tell them, well, like really you can share the experience, because it was like absolutely, even Anne told me, did you make this up? I'm like, what? No way, no, it just happenstance. Again,
you didn't write the script.
So yeah, and I think that this is the incredible thing of architecture, no? Like making things happen and just living this infrastructure there and changing and opening and taking the gates out. And 90% of the people that live there at the beginning said you cannot take any gate out. You can't rehabilitate the space without taking any gate. So we have very small space to work on. But after seeing all these things, they wanted to take out the gates, and 90% of barriers were taken out by the people of the community, not by us. They understood it and they took them out. And just by that, it's like these guys that were drunk and they were hiding behind the gates. Once you don't have gates, there's no place to be hidden. Once that you have put more eyes on some place, then it becomes more safer. So it's just, again, shifting perception to understand that with very, very little elements, you can really change something that it's violent into something more secure without putting walls. That's the thing, no? We think that walls make more secure, but it's not. It should be the opposite.
I think with that, since it's 7:40 now, it's time to
We want to continue.
Yeah, I wish we could. This has been
we know.
a wonderful conversation.
I'm just going to say, I love that we ended with the opposite of a wall. That's like a Zen poem right there. So the homework of everyone in this audience is to tell me when I next see you what the opposite of a wall is. And we're going to keep on talking about openings. Okay, thank you, Katarina.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Rozana and Thomas. Thank you very much. It was a very inspiring, poetic conversation. I want to thank our members for making our programs possible and encourage everyone to go to our website and sign up for our next events that are coming up. Thank you all very much.
And donate to the League. It's an essential institution. It's an everyday miracle.
Yeah. And you will have it recorded and
yes, so we're recording. It will be on our website probably in the next couple of weeks, so everyone can watch it again. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for happening.
Yeah, thank you for making this happen, and thank you all.
Yeah.
See you.